Welcome everyone to the second of our Monash Partners Consumer and Community Involvement Lunchtime Seminar Series. It's terrific to have so many of you joining us today, and also to see some people coming back for this month's session. So welcome. I'm Angela Jones. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Monash Partners, and we're delighted to have Associate Professor Gabrielle Brand from Monash University presenting today on a research approach for co-designing education with healthcare consumers. The purpose of these seminars is to highlight some of the practical work that's being done and the resources across Monash Partners, connect healthcare providers, researchers, managers and consumers, and importantly so we can learn from each other, ask questions and explore areas of interest. Just to let you know, today's seminar is being audio and video recorded, and we will also save the chat. And as we did last month, we'll send out an announcement after the seminar with a summary of the key points, so you've got that information. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting today. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also acknowledge and pay my respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us for our seminar today. The structure of our seminar is that in a few minutes I'm going to hand over to Gabrielle, who's going to give us give a presentation. Then we've got some quick questions we'd like to reflect back to Gabrielle to get some of her insights, and then we will open it up for discussion and questions from you all. Just to highlight, in case some of you may not be aware, Monash Partners has developed a fairly comprehensive suite of training and resources in consumer and community involvement, and these are all available via 6 self-paced modules on our website. We also provide advice and support in consumer and community involvement, so there's an email address there. Please, if you're needing some assistance, reach out to our team and we'll be in touch with you. We also on our website have a range of tip sheets around how to engage with consumers using various technology platforms, and you may find some of those of assistance. And then also we'll be continuing with this lunchtime seminar series throughout the year. At Monash Partners, we aim to create an online space where everybody feels welcome, supported and engaged. So we encourage you, please say hello in the chat. As we're progressing throughout the seminar, please share your thoughts and experiences. We'll be monitoring the chat and able to respond. We have people from various very diverse perspectives joining us today, so we would just ask that everybody's very respectful of that. If you're having any issues, please be in contact with us if you can't link in and you need another link. And at the end, we'll circulate a link to a very brief feedback survey. This just assists us in planning for future seminars. And Sarah, I'm just going to hand over to you now to do the introduction and just introduce Gabby to the rest of the group. And I'll stop sharing my slides.
Okay, thank you, Angela. Welcome Gabrielle today, and thank you very much for your time. So a little bit about Gabrielle. So Gabrielle is an associate professor at Monash University in the School of, School of Nursing and Midwifery?
Yes.
And is a research network lead in preparation for work at the Monash Centre for Scholarship in Health Education. So Gabrielle is a passionate teacher and qualitative researcher with a special interest in narrative medicine, health, humanities and creative pedagogy. She's led the research, co-design and development of a series of consumer-driven reflective learning resources that's titled Depth of Field, which you can see there, which are currently being used to promote person-centred models of care in health professions education across Australia and New Zealand. So thank you very much for joining us today, Gabrielle, to share your work.
Thanks, Angela and Sarah, for your warm welcome. And thanks everyone for joining us today for this lunchtime seminar. I'm delighted to be here. and excited to talk to you about some of our research that we've been doing on how to co-design education with healthcare consumers. So as you can see from my first slide, this is a collaborative project with lots of different people involved. So I would like to extend my thanks and acknowledgement to our funding partners and also to my research team, which includes a doctor, a couple of pharmacists, nursing. Steve Wise is the portrait photographer, and we'll be showing you some of his work a bit later in the seminar. And Carly Shears is our mental health consumer that's on our research team. So really this is, depth of field is something that I've been working on for about 10 years now, and we've been slowly sort of evolving this co-design methodology. And really depth of field is taken from photo, you know, when you use a camera, you use depth of field, because this type of research and subsequent resources that we're developing uses arts and health humanities to represent the lived experience of consumers. So what we do is we draw on this and co-design the resources to teach both current health professionals and workforces, but also our future health professionals. And it gives them an opportunity to gain a deeper insight into what life is really like, living and recovering from different medical and health illnesses. So we embed the consumer's voice into this education through this research process, and it offers an alternate perspective to sort of the more traditional biomedical focus that we see in textbooks when we read. Sort of it's the human element. I'll talk to you about this particular one around mental health today, but we have done a depth of field around exploring ageing and also stroke recovery that we've released before, that are used in curricular and workforce training at the moment. But this particular one we call Depth of Field Exploring Minds, Hearts and Voice, because we focused on mental health issues, because we thought this was really important, and there's lots of misunderstandings about mental illness. So the research that I'll talk a little bit about, and then I'll show you snippets of the resource so you can sort of get an idea about what it looks like. It's strength-based, and I think this is really important because it focuses on the agency and the capabilities of the consumers that co-design the resources with us. And this is in contrast to the more deficit sort of thinking or at-risk perspective that we often use in healthcare education. It is driven by consumers right from the very beginning, even in relation to choosing what topic that we're wanting to do. And then they're involved during the whole process to the final product, including getting lived experience educators to deliver the content and the resources. And it focuses on critical reflection. I think reflection is an interesting one, and there's a bit of a myth that reflection is intuitive, but it's not always intuitive. It's actually a learned concept, and we say that we're graduating reflective practitioners, then we need to create spaces to really challenge some of those assumptions that they might have, and to teach them to be good reflective practitioners and to increase their reflective capacity. So in lots of different resources, we've tried to challenge that in them, because sometimes best learning happens when we're in uncomfortable spaces. So, and I think the core of depth of field is about honouring and legitimising consumers as the experts of their own lives, and that's really important, and what we hope to achieve in these resources. So we use the arts, for example, this portrait that you can see, as a way to translate the consumer's message. And art is a really powerful way because it's a bit abstract. It sort of creates ambiguity in a way, but it also creates a reflective space to think about different aspects. And I'll be running through that a little bit later in the seminar about how we do that. So this particular portrait is actually of the Chief Psychiatrist of Western Australia. His name is Dr. Nathan Gibson, and when we were conceptualising the project and we launched the main aspect of it during Mental Health Week, and because all the 6 consumers that I worked with had a portrait, I contacted him and I asked him if he would like to sit for one as well. And he was so gracious, and and really brave in agreeing to it, because it was really important that we sent a message that we're all in this together. You know, we're all on our own mental health journeys, and as health professionals, it's our responsibility to walk with people during these times. And so they were very brave and vulnerable in sharing some of their narratives with me and sitting for a portrait. So I thought it was also important for us in the research team, as well as the chief psychiatrist, to sit for one. And he, as you can see here, he is ripping apart a straitjacket because he's very passionate about decreasing restraint, including chemical restraint in mental health systems. He's actually in his casual clothes, and normally he's very formal looking. He has some family rings on his fingers. The books in the background are books that have really shaped him as a man and as a father and as a psychiatrist, as well as some mythology in the background and the Greek wording of know thyself, which he feels is the foundation to mental health and psychiatry, for us to know ourselves before we can help others, but also to honour the history of psychiatry and mental health as well in moving forward. So when we launched the portraits, I didn't tell the consumers that we worked with that we had also all sat for a portrait. So when they arrived, theirs was hanging next to the chief psychiatrist, and we were all there together, showing parts of ourselves. And it was a really powerful way to send that message. So I'll just talk a little bit about the methodology that we use. Just trying to, there we go. So we use an exploratory participatory action research in this particular co-design methodology, and we do it in 3 different phases. So phase 1 was to collect some really richly layered mental health narratives from 6 mental health consumers. So I'm a narrative researcher and trained at Columbia in narrative medicine. So I just have the honour of hearing and interpreting people's stories with them. So we had many, many conversations, but the 6 mental health consumers were purposely selected. So we had already consulted with industry to decide, well, where are the training gaps? Which mental health illnesses are sort of misunderstood or mainly stigmatised in mainstream health? And then we selected our consumers based on that. So during these many hours of conversations, and some of them are still going on now as we finish off the project, I also collected artefacts. So things like Kate, you'll learn, is an amazing musician, her favourite music. We had Pamela share with me letters to the editor that she'd written after frustration of not being able to get help for her son Tom. We have mind maps, we have photographs of Clinton's OCD set up in the morning routine. We have poetry and painting. So we collect these along with the narratives, and then we infuse them into the education as sort of little triggers to stimulate that deep reflection I was talking about. And one of my colleagues calls it like an affective or emotive workout. And really we want those triggers to occur because that will actually shift perspectives and perceptions of the health professional learners, which is what we want them to do, is to think a bit differently about it. So phase 2 then is together we go back and forth and we co-design a series of real life vignettes of their story of what it's like to live and recover from mental health issues. We embody these with the really innovative teaching methods. So as an educational researcher, I use a lot of experiential learning because intellectually we can know something, but we don't, unless we actually feel it or embody it, we won't shift our perceptions of ways of seeing the world. So we have been experimenting over the last decade around photo elicitation techniques. I'll show you a little bit about how we use visual thinking strategies. Verbatim theatre is a really powerful way for health professionals, learners, to actually use the same words as the consumer, so they actually feel that experience, and then the reflective questioning prompts. And during this time we're co-designing, we're really focusing on those 5 main co-design principles. So one is we're inclusive. So we consult the industry and not-for-profit and consumers right from the very beginning through all the steps. Number 2 is that we're respectful. We respect that the consumers are the experts by experience, and that we pay them for their time, and they also co-author publications with us if they want. We're participative, so the process is open, it's responsive, it's empathetic, we're co-creating something together. It is iterative, it's cyclic, it goes back and forth a lot, and it's very collaborative. So this process takes time, but you get really rich results. But you have to be quite adaptive and flexible to that. And then, of course, it's outcomes focused, and that's the resource at the end, that we come up with something tangible that we hope will translate into practice and shift the way we see mental health. So the next phase is phase 3, where we validate the vignettes with health profession students and also the health workforce to see, well, is this working? What do we need to adapt or revise? And we're just at that stage now. We use validated tools and focus groups to sort of dig down, well, what was this like for you to engage in this type of teaching, and how can we do it a little bit better? And what we found is that actually there was a significant statistical improvement in health profession students' attitudes and behavioural intentions towards people with mental health issues. And that because we were presenting a strength-based approach, then they were actually saying to us, well, we now see that recovery is possible, whereas the textbooks of that deficit sort of framework that they'd been reading didn't really paint a picture that way, and that was really important. They also felt empathy and humanising type of way of presenting education, which we were really delighted to hear, sort of humanising rather than demonising. And we also used constructs like tribal empathy, you know, where we actually tried to think about, well, how can they connect with the learner and feel that, well, actually as a human, we share that experience, so we feel empathy towards the person in the consumer. Now, we also promote this to be used as a pre-flexion. So we do a lot of reflection in action and after action, but getting learners to do this before they go out into a mental health placement is really powerful, because they're given opportunities to work in small groups where they get to deconstruct some of these assumptions or talk about their fears or anything they like together in a safe environment before they actually out there engaging with the community. And that's a really important thing that I don't think we do all that well in health professions education yet. We forget about that pre-flexion before. So before moving on to show you a little bit, because it's hard to explain like the tangible aspects of the resource, all of the 6 are centered around a portrait, a narrative portrait. So that's how we're using art and the narrative. And these are infused with the artifacts that they shared with me to represent their experience of what it's like living with the mental health issue. So I'm going to show you 6 portraits. The first one is Kate, who has borderline personality disorder. And I'll go into a bit more depth later on in hers. The second one is Rosalie, who we're exploring intergenerational trauma with her. She's an Indigenous woman. The third one is Clinton, and he's an amazing young man who has 7 different mental illness diagnoses. These include Tourette's, depression, PTSD, OCD, depersonalization, and how they all interact with each other. The fourth one is Donna, who is a voice hearer. And she hears 6 voices, and you'll see them by the trumpets above her head. And she tries to explain what that's like and how she works with her voices. The 5th one is Shannon, who has an eating disorder. And the last one is Pamela, who is a woman who cares for her son Tom, who has paranoid schizophrenia. But Tom is a prolific artist, which she supports. And so you'll see a lot of the artwork in the portrait that we can also use in our teaching to help learners understand about psychosis and what that might feel like. So all the 6 workshops or vignettes that we've developed are all sort of centered around an art gallery, which is a really reflective space around the portrait. And then you just move around to the different activities that we have designed together to try and prompt this reflection. So Kate and I worked on some strength-based learning outcomes for what she wanted health professionals to know about borderline personality disorder. So we wanted to identify and discuss those misconceptions, reflect on the different personality traits and discuss how they manifest in Kate's life, reframe some of the diagnostic language to more recovery-based language, and list 3 sort of tangible ways that they can interact with people who experience BDP, which promotes hope and dignity and respect. So after that, we take them through some activities. So there's one here about naming misconceptions of BDP. And this is something that Kate was very passionate about because she felt that it was quite stigmatized, mental illness, from the community. So maybe you guys can have a go out there and say, put in the chat, maybe the first word that pops into your head when you think about a person who has a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, and to be honest about that so that we can sort of raise some of these assumptions that we might have. So manipulative, yeah, complicated, confusing, challenging, demanding, difficult, yeah, unhappy, fearful, confronting. That's great. Thank you for sharing all those. So just coming up with the words, splitting, need to walk on eggshells. Good. So it's not surprising that these types of words come up. Like we have manipulative and taxing, self-harm, catastrophic, attention-seeking, treatment-resistant, overreactive, impulsive. But what we learned from Kate is that these words are words that Catherine uses to describe herself. And we talk a lot about self-stigma and the impact that it has on her when she goes to seek for help, knowing that people feel that these assumptions. And we get the learners to think, well, where did these misconceptions come from? Where'd they come from? Having a think about. Did you know a neighbour when you're a child growing up? Or did they come from health systems? Those types of things. And then what are the dangers of misconstruing BDP for those who are still suffering from the condition? And then getting them to reflect how these misconceptions can influence our role as a health professional, sometimes unconsciously. So just raising that and getting them to discuss those issues was an important part of this resource for Kate. So what we also wanted to do across the 6 of them is to reframe that clinical language that we use. So in health professions education, we use the DSM-5 diagnostic criteria, and it states that borderline personality disorder is a pervasive pattern of instability of interpersonal relationships, self-image and effects, and marked impulsivity beginning by early childhood, adulthood, and present in a variety of contexts as indicated by 5 or more of the personality traits. So you guys are right, it is a very complex condition. And so we read that, or we present that to health professional learners, but what does that actually mean? What's Kate's definition of borderline personality disorder?
It's so many different things that it's hard to find one definition. It's like living in mental hell, oversensitive and overwhelmed by strong and frightening emotions. It's like having open wounds all over your body and walking through salt water, not feeling worthy enough to accept to ask for help, such self-hatred and loathing, longing to be dead.
So what we're using is we're trying to tap into sort of multi-sensorial type of learning. This is her handwriting and it's her own voice coming through to teach health professionals that this is how it feels for her, and we contrast that with the clinical language to try and get them to think about that. So there's just one more activity that I'll show you, because I'm a big fan of visual thinking strategies, and it's starting to take off and used a lot more in education, which is great. But really, it came from art galleries. So it's just about fostering aesthetic development, reflective observation, and empathy. And we do that through teaching learners about careful and collaborative looking. So they do this in small groups. So in order to represent personality trait 3, which is the identity disturbance and marked and persistently unstable self-image or sense of self, we get the learners to talk in groups first, and we ask them, well, what do you see in this portrait? And this is the bit of the difference between the depth of field methodology that we've been developing, is that this inverts the traditional way we teach health professions education. Normally we would give context, like we say, here's a 89-year-old man presented to the emergency department with a fractured neck of femur, da da da. Whereas we don't, we just throw up that lovely portrait of Kate that she's co-designed, that is her, and we get them to talk in small groups and create a story or a narrative around that. And because we haven't given any context, it's sort of a bit like a vacuum where all their assumptions and that they might not have known come out in the stories that they tell. And then at the end, we present Kate's actual story. So we've been developing some ways we can juxtapose certain photographs to try and raise and surface those assumptions. So we asked, well, what do you see? What are the symbols that you can see in this portrait? What do you think the symbols mean? And what message is she trying to convey to you? And what stage of the recovery process might she be in? And then imagination is so underrated in health professions education. We get them to imagine, you know, what do you wonder about? If you could ask her a question, what would it be? Okay, so they spend a long time talking about all these things. And then Kate is going to tell you about what these symbols mean.
Holding the bassoon. I'm a bassoonist. Music is so important to me. My daily ritual of practicing is like meditation, like my contact with God. It's how I communicate with the world. It's my voice. I'm holding it in that manner because it's my weapon. That's why I'm holding it like a spear.
Strength-based.
The mask. I was so happy that Steve chose to put a mask because he saw me as a warrior, and it invited me to see myself as a warrior, as winning a battle against this difficult illness. For me, it also symbolises my identity disturbance. Sometimes I just wonder, who am I? And I have to wear a mask to get by every day. Across my chest are my reeds, and on my back is my cello and bow. They look like weapons and ammunition, and this is the same reason as the bassoon. I also play the cello, and it's my ammunition against my mental illness. My left hand is a blue book. We affectionately call it the Big Book, and it's an important part of my 12-step program. On top of the book is a very special fountain pen, and I use this to do a lot of journal writing. It helps me be aware of my emotions, what I'm thinking.
So an example is what the learners will often say, it must be a passport. She loves travel. But then when she discloses it's the Big Book, we can talk a bit about codependence and alcohol and other drug issues and how they intersect with mental illness.
Behind me is the first draft of Mahler's Ninth Symphony in his own hand. This is a very important symphony to me, as his confrontation with his own mortality reminded me of my need to embrace life. On the bottom right hand corner you can see a tally with a full stop. It's simply the number of attempts I've made on my life, and the full stop shows my promise to the world that I will never again try and suicide. Around my neck, I have a necklace with a 9-pointed star, which is the symbol of the Baha'i faith. And I believe in a higher power and that the universe has got my back.
So that just gives you some examples about the resource and how we've infused the consumer's voice. And Kate and I co-designed that particular resource, where I feel that she really is here with me when you hear her voice. But there's a whole series of other activities that we do around some really challenging topics like suicide and those types of things that Kate and I feel is really important to talk about and bring up. So that's the end of my sort of formal presentation. So maybe some questions or...
Thank you so much, Gabrielle. That was stunning, beautiful, so beautifully explained, and you took us through that journey really, really well. Before we open it to the floor for questions, I'm going to ask you my 3 rapid fire questions.
Yeah.
And while I'm asking Gabrielle these questions, please start thinking about questions you would like to ask Gabrielle, because we'll be handing over to you guys next. So our first question, Gabrielle, what has been one of your key learnings from your consumer and community involvement work today?
Okay, I think one of my key learnings, and I just keep relearning it and relearning it, relearning it, is that I always knew that there's a massive chasm between what we as health professionals think health consumers need and then what they actually need. But I think because I work with consumers all the time, I'm just always so amazed at how the chasm still exists. And I think that's one of the advantages of working with them, because it's so powerful, their voice and what they bring to that. And it just keeps reminding me every time we work on projects together.
Excellent. So the importance of engaging with consumers as you have through this project. Second question, what has been the best advice and the worst advice that you have heard about consumer and community involvement?
Okay. The best advice is to keep your eyes and your heart and your mind open. I think, and you need to be really flexible in your approach and adaptive. And I think you need to be open to the unexpected. And I think as a qualitative and a narrative researcher, I have to be mindful of keeping open all the time. And I know that if I do, then that's like when the magic occurs, you know, that you are open to hearing another perspective that might be so different to your own. And that's where all the learning happens. But the worst advice, I think, is that it just takes too much time. And I think they're right, it does take more time. But in true, like, authentic co-design, it's going to take time, but the rewards are so rich that you get if you do. So I, as a researcher, just have like reframed my way of thinking about it, like learning. So I see co-design as a process, and I focus on the process, not necessarily the outcome. And that helps when I'm actually, you know, contradicted in these very tight time frames in academia to finish projects.
Excellent, thank you. And our last question, and then we'll throw it over to the audience. What would better look like for consumer and community involvement in health and medical research and healthcare improvement?
Sure. So as an educational researcher, I think better in terms of education and health professions education would be to start employing lived experience educators, not just to deliver sessions, but I would like to see them, you know, teaching, assessing, co-designing curricula like Kate's done here. And, you know, we've been talking here I'm based at the Peninsula campus about setting up a consumer simulated patient bank where we could actually train consumers to co-design simulations for training and also to give feedback. Can you imagine how powerful that would be, that we had a real person there and a student was engaging with them, and then they would say, well, actually, I didn't really think that you heard me when I said this. You know, I would really like you to have responded in this way, or different things like that. But in terms of research, I think what would better look like, it would be that the healthcare consumers are driving our research agendas from the very beginning. And I think we need to raise our expectations about what type of involvement they can have. I mean, they're amazing to conceptualise, analyse, disseminate. Carly goes and presents all our research, and she's championing out there with all the not-for-profit mental health organisations and translating it into practice. And I think we need to be aware of our power as in academia too, and to create spaces in that research team where consumers' voices can be heard. And I think sometimes we don't realise that just because we say this, this and this, they might actually agree with us because they think, well, wow, she's got doctor in front of her name or something like that. So I think being aware of that is really important. So you just have to sort of leave your ego at the door and have round tables.
Yeah, thank you. They were really beautiful, honest answers. So thank you for sharing those insights with us.
Thanks,
Angela, did you want to facilitate the questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Dash, and welcome for the other members of the panel. Very welcome to chime in at any point as well. Gabrielle, thank you so much. What a powerful presentation. Just amazing work. There are a few questions that have come through that I just would be great to have your insights. A question around what are your hopes for growing consumer academics and educators as colleagues in your own school?
Yeah, so I've just 2 years ago I relocated from WA, and WA does consumer involvement quite well, and they were just starting at that time to employ lived experience academics. I know they have them at Curtin University in social work. And so that is something that I feel really passionate about, and something that would be so valuable to our school and our team and to health professions education. So I think there has been some talk of it, and there's been some recent publications about lived experience academics, and I think that it will continue to grow. Well, I'm hoping it will continue to grow in the next couple of years.
Fantastic. Another comment around we're constantly obviously designing and developing education for consumers around various ways they can self-manage their health condition and do that in an optimal way. The question is there evidence, or perhaps based on your experience, that these approaches work well with this population of learners as well?
So these particular depths of field, we've only really developed them for current healthcare professionals as well as future ones. So we use it in undergraduate curriculum across the health professions. But I definitely think that it would be translatable to teaching peer-to-peer. So Kate actually presented her vignette, the part that you saw, to the borderline personality disordered support group. She presented her own and talked about her recovery journey. And so that's only just one thing that happened last month, but I definitely think that it would be very powerful, and that's an area that I would like to look into in the future.
Also a question about what advice you would provide around how to build trust and openness with consumers, which we know is so important, and that perception or the reality of the power imbalance that often exists between healthcare professionals and consumers, or researchers and consumers. Any thoughts there?
I think we often underestimate the time that it takes to build that trust. And I think that goes to the heart of spending that time and looking at it as a process. We had many meetings together, and, you know, back and forth. And the first couple was just a coffee and a chat. And Kate and I, particularly Kate, who's a friend of mine now too, because we developed such a strong relationship going through this process together. So I just think being honest and being open, and checking in, because there has been times where I've been challenged from a different perspective to what I thought, and it is an uncomfortable feeling for everyone, I think, that feels it. But I've sort of learned to embrace that uncomfortableness and think, what do I need to look at here so that I can be the best researcher I can, you know, and I can really truly represent stories in powerful ways. And so I think just being open and honest, a bit of intellectual streaking, or Dash and I were talking before about Brene Brown's work around vulnerability, and I think embracing those things really helps develop the trust.
We've got another question here, thank you, around is the work that you're doing similar to Photo Voice Project, which I'm not familiar with?
Yeah, I used a lot of the photo elicitation in my research, where we just throw out a photograph and then we get more deeper sort of data or discussions based on the photograph. And Photo Voice is very similar, but it's more around where the community is given a camera or different places, and they get to take photographs of different aspects to represent and drive the research that you're doing. So it's a bit similar, but this particular is more co-design because it's more iterative, it's back and forth, and we're sort of co-creating those portraits and the resource together. Yeah.
And any comments you might make about how this could be translated into other areas of clinical care? The question that's been asked is around specifically patients with renal conditions, but which is one example, or other areas as well, and perhaps how you've showcased it and how you've generated awareness and interest in it as well as an innovative approach to research and education.
Sure. So we have done, like I said before, about one around aging and stroke recovery, and this is our third one around mental health. So because this is the depth of field as a methodology, it is transferable to other types of areas. And so we have had a talk about some maternity care settings and those types of things. So it is, but I think this particular project is just finishing up now. Over 2 years it's taken, so that they're not quick projects, so you need to sort of like get a sense of where the funding might be to help you with that process. So definitely transferable. And what was the second bit of that question, Angela?
So how have you generated public awareness or interest in the work, in the approach that you're taking?
Well, I think we do publish, obviously, but that's really only to the academic sort of community. So I'm getting better. I need some upskilling in social media, or to put it out there a little bit more. And obviously having a launch and having something tangible like the portraits, we had the community coming in and having a look at those types of things. And I think that having the evidence behind it and testing them and actually going through the research process of getting ethics and collecting the narratives and those types of things sort of gives it a little bit more credibility, in a sense that we can say that actually this process works, and we are able to shift attitudes or perceptions of stigmatized groups with the learners. But we're still sort of developing those evaluation sort of standards around this particular methodology.
I really loved your idea around having lived experience educators. Doesn't that just make such sense?
Yeah, it does.
That you would be open about the fact that you're an educator, but you have a lived experience of a condition, and that experience might flow openly into your interaction with students and how you prepare them to provide care. It seems such a logical thing. As a clinician, I look back and I think, well, why haven't we always done that?
Yeah.
But we haven't.
Yeah. It's very true. And I think, I know Carly does a lot of the lived experience as a lived experience educator. She's on our research team. She wasn't one of the participants in it, so that's a difference. So we had the 6 consumers, but also Carly as well on the research team, so they had different roles, but all of our 6 participants have or consumers have their vignettes, and they go out and show people and deliver them as well, as Carly delivering them in the more formal sort of health professions education settings.
Fantastic. Just to open up to other members of the CCI team, if they had any comments or questions as well.
I don't know, Gabrielle, if you wanted to comment on how you've done publications or conference presentations with the consumers that have been involved in your work. I know that's something people are quite interested in.
Sure, yeah. I think that was one of the things I was surprised about, in the sense that I didn't realise how much Carly would be involved in in the research, and she is so involved in the community and that translating. She is the one that goes to the conferences and presents the research as a lived experience educator and a mental health consumer, but also she has that credibility and voice within that within the community, which is great. So I think in the chat we're going to share at the end the medical education article that we just published on this particular approach that Carly is a co-author, because she was instrumental in working with us to develop the methodology. And also Pamela Griffiths, who's the mother of Tom in the last portrait, is also a co-author, because we wrote her vignette back and forth, and she's got lots of verbatim quotes. And then at the end, we talk about, you know, some of the challenges that we had all working together and how she felt about it. And then Kate will also share with you a publication that Kate and the Borderline Warrior and I wrote together about the lived experience of working together and co-creating, and we published that in the Journal of Psychiatric and Mental Health Nursing. So I think it's really important to co-author with them, because they had so much involvement from the conception all through. We analysed things together, we wrote things together, and those types of things. So it's a really good process.
We've just popped into the chat some resources that Gabrielle shared with us that you can download. So some papers, some more information about Catherine and the Borderline Warrior, and also using arts and health humanities in health professions education. So we just got a question that's come through now, Gabrielle. Can you explain more on the receptiveness of students to this style of teaching, or other academics' view on this method of education?
Yeah, I think I need to be honest in saying that there has been some resistance. It's a very different way of learning than we're used to, like I said, because it inverts the traditional ways that we learn. And I've taught across all the health professions, and I'm not going to stereotype some professions over the others, but I will say that some health professional learners are a bit more open to it than others. But you know, when I've delivered the sessions, I just walk them through it and say that these uncomfortable feelings, that's reflection. That's what you need to feel to be growing and reflecting, and that's okay. And we just try and create a really safe space for them to feel safe enough to share some of their insights. In terms of other staff, I think reflection is not often valued over content. And, you know, if you're an experiential learner, or, you know, which is the whole core of this aspect, reflection is the most important aspect of it. Otherwise, there's no deep learning to occur. And so I'm constantly at the curriculum committee meetings saying we need to allocate some time for these spaces to reflect. And it's okay sometimes to take out a little bit of the content, because that's so easy that we can get onto Google nowadays, and, you know, teach and really foster this reflective capacity so that our health professionals are lifelong learners going in, because we know that the health system is always changing and we need them to embrace that change. So we're also here at Monash doing some research around uncertainty tolerance and how we can actually teach it. And I think that directly is an aspect of depth of field that's really exciting to learn about, ways that we can teach and foster uncertainty tolerance in our students.
Being uncomfortable with what's uncertain.
Being uncomfortable, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We've just popped into the chat, everyone, a link to a very brief survey. Your input would be invaluable in terms of us moving forward and designing this lunchtime seminar series and presenting areas that are of interest to you. So for everybody online, if you had a moment or two to complete that survey, we would be really, really appreciative of that. Another comment around, we currently use lived experience consumers in our education program to tell their stories and their journeys to current consumers. Sometimes though we sit nervously, unsure exactly what they will say, and worry that there will be some unhelpful comments or attitudes presented in that kind of live environment. We feel like there needs to be some training provided to these lived experience workers. Just a question, Gabrielle, do you know of such models of training? Perhaps the vignettes and portraits provide the opportunity to pick and choose appropriate things to present, but any thoughts around that would be really helpful.
I'm not quite sure about here in Victoria, but in WA, you know, like Richmond Wellbeing or Consumers of Mental Health, they run recovery storytelling training, which all of the 6 mental health consumers we used in our project did, and that was really important for ethics. So they had gone through the process of doing training around recovery storytelling and what, you know, so that they were safe, but also that they were trained in terms of what to share, what not to share. But it's difficult for them, I suppose, going into an environment where you never know what the learners are going to say or whether they could. And then people come in and out of recovery all the time, so you have to check in. So I think that's one of the advantages of depth of field, is that Kate and I worked together on this one over a long period of time, so we know exactly what she's sharing at that particular time. We can make sure that the learners are safe, but also that Kate might not be offended by some comments or different things when you don't really know the attitudes of the learners. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you. Look, I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank you. Most sincerely, I found your presentation profoundly moving and powerful, and it's a wonderful story around bringing consumers into the world of teaching the next generation of healthcare professionals, and I don't think there's anything more important. So Gabrielle, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you everyone for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next month, where some consumer engagement leads from our health service partners will be presenting on some of the work that we're doing. Please reach out to us in the meantime. If you have a chance to finish that survey, that would be terrific. But thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.